The last rays of sunlight painted the sky crimson over Silver Peak, Colorado, as Cassidy Ainsworth stepped off the stagecoach, her face partially hidden beneath the brim of her hat. She clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest, eyes darting nervously as she surveyed the bustling main street. This town would be her fresh start, a place where nobody knew her name or the secrets she carried like a shadow. Silver Peak had boomed with the discovery of silver in 1878, transforming from a dusty outpost to a town of nearly 2,000 souls in just 3 years. By 1883, when Cassidy arrived, the town boasted a hotel, 3 saloons, a mercantile, a bank, and even a small theater. Mountains loomed in the distance, sentinels watching over the valley where the town nestled like a pearl in an oyster shell. Cassidy moved with purpose toward the Silver Peak Hotel, ignoring the curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing a young woman traveling alone. At 23, she had the kind of beauty that turned heads: honey-brown hair, striking green eyes, and a graceful bearing that belied the hardships she'd endured. But there was something else about her too: a wariness, a guardedness that suggested she'd seen more of life's cruelties than someone her age should. "Need help with your bag, miss?" A boy of about 12 offered, his freckled face earnest. "That's kind of you," Cassidy said, her voice soft but confident. "The hotel isn't far, I can manage." "You new in town?" The boy fell into step beside her. "I'm Tommy. I know everybody in Silver Peak." "Is that so?" Cassidy smiled despite herself. "Then perhaps you can tell me who I might speak to about employment. I'm handy with numbers and correspondence." Tommy's face lit up. "My pa works at the bank. He says Mr. Jenkins is looking for someone who writes a fine hand since his last clerk left for Denver." The Silver Peak Hotel was a 3-story building with a wide porch and clean windows, impressive for a mining town. Cassidy thanked Tommy, pressed a penny into his palm, and climbed the steps to begin her new life. Inside, the lobby smelled of beeswax and pine. The clerk, a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Room for one, please," Cassidy said, placing a few coins on the counter. "Just for a few days until I find more permanent lodgings." The clerk studied her, curiosity evident in his gaze. "Name?" "Cassidy Ainsworth," she replied, then added, "I've come to seek employment. I hear the bank might be hiring." "That's so." The clerk handed her a key. "Room 204. Breakfast is served from 6 to 8. And yes, Jenkins at the bank lost his clerk last month. Word travels fast in Silver Peak." "Thank you." She took the key, feeling the weight of it in her palm, the first tangible sign of her new beginning. Cassidy climbed the stairs to her room, unlocked the door, and sat heavily on the bed. Exhaustion from her journey washed over her. From her satchel, she withdrew a small framed photograph, a handsome young man in uniform, his eyes bright with promise. She traced the outline of his face with her fingertip before returning it to the depths of her bag. "I made it, Robert," she whispered. "I'm starting over, just like we planned." The next morning, Cassidy rose early, dressed in her most respectable attire, a navy blue skirt and white shirtwaist, with her hair neatly pinned. After a quick breakfast, she made her way to the Silver Peak Bank, a solid brick building that spoke of permanence and prosperity. Inside, she approached a teller and asked to speak with Mr. Jenkins. Minutes later, she was ushered into a small office where a portly man with mutton chop whiskers sat behind a desk. "Miss Ainsworth, is it?" he said, gesturing to a chair. "Tommy Wilson speaks highly of your qualifications, though I suspect he knows little of banking." His eyes twinkled with amusement. Cassidy smiled. "I've worked as a bookkeeper in Baltimore for 3 years, sir. I'm quick with figures and meticulous with records." "Baltimore? That's quite a journey. What brings you to our little corner of Colorado?" She had prepared for this question. "My parents passed last year. There was nothing to keep me there, and I've always longed to see the West." Jenkins nodded sympathetically. "My condolences. But why Silver Peak specifically?" "I read about the silver boom," she said smoothly. "Where there's prosperity, there's need for capable hands." Jenkins seemed satisfied with her answer. After testing her arithmetic skills and examining her handwriting, he offered her the position on the spot. "You can start Monday," he said. "Pay is $30 a month. Hours are 8 to 4, 6 days a week. The bank provides lunch." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins." I won't disappoint you. As Cassidy exited the bank, a weight lifted from her shoulders. With steady employment, she could afford modest lodgings and perhaps, in time, even save enough to buy a small property of her own. For the first time in months, hope flickered in her heart. She spent the remainder of the day exploring Silver Peak, familiarizing herself with its layout. The town had a raw energy about it, men in dusty clothes emerging from mines, merchants hawking their wares, ladies in fine dresses parading down wooden sidewalks. And everywhere, the sound of construction hammers pounding, saws buzzing, the town growing before her eyes. At the Mercantile, she purchased a few necessities and inquired about rooms for rent. Mrs. Holloway on Pine Street takes in boarders, the shopkeeper's wife told her. Respectable place, clean, and she serves a decent supper. Armed with directions, Cassidy made her way to a 2-story house with lace curtains and a neat garden. Mrs. Holloway, a widow in her 50s with steel gray hair and kind eyes, showed her a small but comfortable room on the 2nd floor. No men allowed upstairs, she said firmly. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. Laundry once a week. $5 a week, payable every Friday. It's perfect, Cassidy said, relieved to find such suitable accommodations. I'll move in tomorrow, if that's agreeable. That evening, as Cassidy dined alone in the hotel restaurant, she noticed the glances and whispers directed her way. In a town like Silver Peak, a new face, especially one belonging to an unaccompanied young woman, was cause for speculation. She kept her eyes on her plate, knowing that curiosity would eventually fade as she established herself as a respectable member of the community. What she didn't notice was the tall figure watching her from the bar, a man whose weathered face spoke of years under the sun, whose eyes held both kindness and caution. Isaac Xavier sipped his whiskey slowly, his attention captured by the newcomer who carried herself with such quiet dignity. By Monday morning, Cassidy was settled in at Mrs. Holloway's and reporting for her first day at the bank. Mr. Jenkins introduced her to the other employees, 2 tellers, a security guard, and the bank manager, Mr. Pearson. Her desk was situated in a corner of the main floor, affording her a view of both the street outside and the daily operations of the bank. The work was familiar and comforting in its predictability. She recorded transactions, balanced ledgers, and drafted correspondence for Mr. Jenkins. By lunchtime, she had already impressed her employer with her efficiency. "You're a godsend, Miss Ainsworth," Jenkins declared. "The last fellow couldn't tell a debit from a credit half the time." The weeks passed, and Cassidy fell into a routine. She worked diligently at the bank, took her meals with the other boarders at Mrs. Holloway's, and spent her Sundays attending the local church and reading in the small park near the center of town. Gradually, the townspeople became accustomed to her presence, though she maintained a polite distance, sharing little about her past. It was in the bank that she first encountered Isaac Xavier properly. He came in to deposit money from his ranch sales, a substantial sum that indicated his operation was no small affair. "Miss," he said, approaching her desk rather than the teller's windows. "I need to arrange a draft to be sent to Denver." Cassidy looked up into the face of a man perhaps 30 years of age, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. Despite his rugged appearance, he had an air of quiet authority that commanded respect. "Of course, Mr. Xavier. Isaac Xavier. I own the Circle X Ranch about 10 miles east." Cassidy nodded, all business as she prepared the necessary paperwork. "Amount, $500. She wrote carefully, aware of his gaze on her hands. "And the recipient?" "Caldwell Agricultural Supply. It's for a new plow and some breeding stock." As she completed the form, she could feel him studying her. Not in the way some men did with hunger or presumption, but with genuine curiosity. "You're new to Silver Peak," he stated rather than asked. "Yes, I arrived a few weeks ago." "From?" Cassidy hesitated only briefly. "Baltimore." Isaac nodded, as if this confirmed something for him. "That's quite a change." "I was ready for something different," she replied, her tone polite but final. He seemed to understand her reluctance to elaborate. Taking the completed form, he signed it with a flourish. "Thank you, Miss Ainsworth." She blinked in surprise. "How did you know my name?" A small smile touched his lips. "Small town. Word gets around." He tipped his hat. Good day to you. As he walked away, Cassidy found herself watching him longer than was strictly necessary. There was something about Isaac Xavier that intrigued her, a steadiness, perhaps, or the way he'd respected her boundaries without offense. Over the next few months, Isaac visited the bank regularly, always making a point to conduct his business with Cassidy. Their interactions remained professional, but a quiet rapport developed between them. He never pressed her for personal information, which she appreciated more than he could know. Spring gave way to summer, and Silver Peak blossomed in the mountain sunshine. Cassidy had settled comfortably into her role at the bank and her place in the community. She even made a few cautious friendships, particularly with Clara Wilson, Tommy's mother, who invited her to Sunday dinners. It was at one such dinner in July that Cassidy learned more about Isaac Xavier. He came here 5 years ago, Clara explained as they washed dishes together. Bought that ranch when it was nothing but a run-down cabin and some scrubby pasture. Now it's one of the most prosperous spreads in the county. He seems capable, Cassidy said neutrally. Clara laughed. That's one word for it. Isaac's as solid as they come. Lost his wife and child to fever back east somewhere. Doesn't talk about it much. Cassidy's hands stilled in the dishwater. I didn't know. He keeps to himself mostly. Runs his ranch, deals fairly with folks. Some say he's too serious, but there's kindness there if you look for it. The knowledge that Isaac had also experienced profound loss shifted something in Cassidy's perception of him. Perhaps that explained the shadow she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes, a reflection of her own. One afternoon in late August, Cassidy was walking back to her boarding house when a sudden summer storm erupted. Rain poured down in sheets, and she ducked under the awning of the hardware store, resigned to waiting out the deluge. Miss Ainsworth. The familiar voice came from beside her. Isaac Xavier stood there, holding the reins of his horse. Caught in the weather? It appears so, she replied, brushing droplets from her sleeves. I'm headed back to my ranch, but I'd be happy to see you safely to your door first. She hesitated, but the rain was intensifying. That's very kind, thank you. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. The proximity was unsettling. She could feel the solid warmth of him at her back, smell the leather and pine scent of him. They rode in silence through the rain-slick streets, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he guided the horse. At Mrs. Holloway's, he dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and for a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could see the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. Thank you, Mr. Xavier, she said, stepping back. Isaac, he corrected gently. After sharing a horse in a downpour, I think we can dispense with formalities. A smile tugged at her lips. Cassidy, then. Cassidy. He said her name as if testing how it felt. Stay dry. With a nod, he remounted and rode away through the curtain of rain. That night, Cassidy found herself thinking of Isaac Xavier, of his kindness, his respect for her privacy, the shared experience of loss that Clara had hinted at. For the first time since arriving in Silver Peak, she felt a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The next day at the bank, a package arrived for her, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a folding umbrella with a note that read simply, "For the next cloudburst. X." The gesture touched her deeply. It was thoughtful without being presumptuous, practical yet personal. She tucked the note into her pocket, a small treasure to be examined later in private. As September painted the surrounding mountains with gold and crimson, Isaac began to call at Mrs. Holloway's, asking if Cassidy might accompany him for walks or to the occasional community gathering. Mrs. Holloway, who considered herself Cassidy's de facto guardian, approved of Isaac's attentions. A more respectable suitor you couldn't find, she declared. And it's high time you enjoyed some company besides account books. Cassidy accepted his invitations with growing ease. Their conversations flowed naturally, touching on books they'd read, observations about the town, and the changing seasons. Isaac never pried into her past, and she extended him the same courtesy. But as their friendship deepened, Cassidy became increasingly aware of the whispers that followed her. Silver Peak was small, and secrets were hard to keep. She'd noticed the occasional curious glance, the conversations that halted when she entered a shop. At first, she dismissed it as the natural curiosity toward a newcomer, but there was something more pointed in these interactions now. One afternoon in early October, Cassidy and Isaac were walking back from the Harvest Festival when they passed the Silver Dollar Saloon. A group of men stood outside, and their conversation ceased abruptly as Cassidy approached. One man, clearly in his cups, nudged another and muttered something that made the others laugh. Isaac's posture stiffened. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying a note of warning. The men sobered somewhat at his greeting. "Xavier," one acknowledged, tipping his hat. His eyes slid to Cassidy with undisguised curiosity. As they continued walking, Cassidy could feel the weight of the men's stares on her back. "What are they saying about me?" she asked quietly once they were out of earshot. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Nothing worth repeating. Please, Isaac. I need to know." He sighed, guiding her to a bench in the small town square. "There's been talk. Someone recognized your name. Said you were involved in some scandal back east." Cassidy's blood ran cold. "What exactly did they say?" "That you were engaged to a soldier who died under suspicious circumstances. That his family accused you of impropriety." Isaac's discomfort was evident, but his eyes held no judgment. "I don't give credence to gossip, Cassidy." She sat very still, her hands clenched in her lap. The past she'd fled had found her, twisted and distorted by malicious tongues. "And what do you think?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac's response was immediate. "I think you're a woman of integrity who doesn't deserve to be the subject of idle speculation." His hand covered hers briefly. "You don't owe me or anyone else explanations." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you," she managed, though the words felt inadequate. They walked back to Mrs. Holloway's in silence, both lost in thought. At the door, Isaac hesitated. "Will you join me for dinner tomorrow? At my ranch. It's quiet there, no prying eyes or loose tongues." The invitation surprised her. It would be the first time they'd be truly alone, away from the watchful gaze of the town. The propriety of such an arrangement was questionable, but Cassidy found herself nodding. "I'd like that." The following day, Isaac arrived at Mrs. Holloway's with a buggy at precisely 4 o'clock. Mrs. Holloway gave them a knowing look, but merely said, "Have her back at a decent hour, Mr. Xavier." The ride to the Circle X Ranch took them through rolling hills ablaze with autumn colors. As they crested a final rise, Cassidy gasped at the vista before her. A sprawling ranch nestled in a valley, with a 2-story house of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, and pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. "You've built something remarkable here." Pride flickered across Isaac's face. "It's been a labor of love. A necessity. Keeping busy helps with." He trailed off, but she understood what remained unsaid. The house was warm and inviting, with polished wooden floors and simple, well-crafted furniture. A woman in her 60s greeted them in the kitchen. "Miss Ainsworth, this is Mrs. Gutierrez. She keeps house for me and ensures I don't starve." The older woman smiled warmly. "So pleased to finally meet you, Miss Ainsworth. Mr. Xavier speaks highly of you." Her accent carried the musical cadence of Mexico. "Thank you for having me," Cassidy replied, charmed by Mrs. Gutierrez's genuine welcome. Dinner was a sumptuous affair: roast beef, vegetables from Isaac's garden, freshly baked bread, and an apple pie that made Cassidy close her eyes in bliss. They ate in the dining room, with Mrs. Gutierrez discreetly serving before taking her leave to her quarters behind the kitchen. As they lingered over coffee, Isaac spoke of his plans for the ranch, expanding his cattle breeding program, planting an orchard, adding more grazing land to the east. "You speak as if you'll be here forever," Cassidy observed. "That's the plan. I've put down roots here." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "What about you? Is Silver Peak just a stopping place?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Cassidy traced the rim of her cup with her finger. "I came here to start fresh. To escape." She paused, gathering courage. "Perhaps it's time I told you the truth, Isaac, before the rumors reach you in an even more distorted form." His expression grew serious. "Only if you want to, Cassidy, not because you feel obligated." She took a deep breath. "I was engaged to Robert Thornfield, a captain in the Union Army. Though the war had ended years before, he remained in service. We were to be married last spring. The pain, dulled by time but never absent, throbbed anew. 3 weeks before our wedding, he was found dead, shot through the heart, in his quarters. Isaac remained silent, his eyes never leaving her face. Initial reports suggested suicide, but I knew better. Robert was happy, making plans for our future. Then his father, Colonel Thornfield, accused me of infidelity, claimed I'd driven Robert to take his own life out of despair. Her voice shook with indignation. It was a lie. I loved Robert completely, but the colonel was powerful, with friends in high places. He couldn't bear the thought that his son might have been murdered, so he created a narrative that placed the blame elsewhere. With you? Isaac said quietly. Cassidy nodded. The investigation eventually ruled Robert's death a homicide, likely by a fellow officer who'd been embezzling funds that Robert discovered. But by then, the damage to my reputation was done. Colonel Thornfield never retracted his accusations. I became a pariah in Baltimore society. She looked up, meeting Isaac's gaze directly. So I left. I changed nothing but my location, not my name, not my history. I have nothing to hide, Isaac. I simply wanted peace. For a long moment, Isaac said nothing. Then he reached across the table and took her hand in his. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. And now you know why they whisper, she said, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. Let them whisper, Isaac replied, his eyes flashing with sudden intensity. Those who judge without knowledge aren't worth your concern. As the evening drew to a close, Isaac drove her back to town, the buggy wheels crunching on the gravel road beneath a canopy of stars. They spoke little, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with new understanding. At Mrs. Holloway's door, Isaac helped Cassidy down from the buggy. May I call on you this Sunday? He asked. I'd like that, she replied, surprised by how much she meant it. He tipped his hat and waited until she was safely inside before driving away. Cassidy climbed the stairs to her room, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Sharing her story with Isaac had lifted a burden she hadn't realized was crushing her. The next few weeks saw a deepening of their relationship. Isaac called regularly, taking Cassidy on drives through the countryside, to church socials, and occasionally to dinner at the hotel restaurant. His attentions were unmistakable to the townsfolk, and Cassidy found the nature of the whispers changing less about her mysterious past and more about the possibility of a match between the town's most eligible rancher and the attractive bank clerk. But not all the talk was benign. In early November, Cassidy was working at the bank when she overheard a conversation between two customers waiting in line. Xavier could do better than a woman with her history, a man's voice said. Heard she was involved with some scandal back east. Wouldn't surprise me, his companion replied. Pretty face often hides a tarnished character. Cassidy kept her head down, her cheeks burning with humiliation. The men fell silent as they approached her desk, their faces masks of polite indifference as she processed their transactions. That evening, as she walked to Mrs. Holloway's, a carriage pulled alongside her. She looked up to see Isaac, his expression thunderous. Get in, he said, reaching to open the door. What's wrong? She asked as she settled onto the seat beside him. I heard what was said at the bank today. His knuckles were white on the reins. By the Peterson brothers. You shouldn't concern yourself with idle gossip, Cassidy said, though her heart warmed at his evident anger on her behalf. It's more than gossip when it causes pain. Isaac guided the carriage toward the edge of town. I've invited a few people to dinner at the hotel tonight. I'd like you to join us. Isaac, I don't think, please, Cassidy. Trust me. Something in his voice persuaded her. They rode to the Silver Peak Hotel, where Isaac escorted her to a private dining room. Inside, she was surprised to find Mr. Jenkins from the bank, Sheriff Thompson, Mayor Wallace, and Reverend Porter, all influential men in Silver Peak. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on short notice, Isaac said, helping Cassidy to her seat. I've asked you here because I value your judgment and your influence in this town. The men murmured greetings, curiosity evident in their expressions. It's come to my attention that certain rumors about Miss Ainsworth's past have been circulating, Isaac continued. As men of standing in this community, I thought you should hear the truth directly, rather than distorted versions in the saloon. Cassidy's heart pounded. Isaac looked at her, his eyes asking a silent question. She gave a small nod, and he squeezed her hand before addressing the men again. Miss Ainsworth was engaged to a Union Army officer who was murdered. His father, unwilling to accept that his son had been killed because of something he discovered, falsely accused Miss Ainsworth of impropriety. Though the investigation eventually cleared her name, the damage to her reputation was done. The men listened attentively as Isaac recounted the story she'd shared with him. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. "Miss Ainsworth," Mr. Jenkins said finally, "I've found you to be nothing but honest and diligent in your work. Your personal history doesn't change my high opinion of you." "Nor mine," added Reverend Porter. "Our church teaches forgiveness and compassion, not judgment based on hearsay." Sheriff Thompson nodded his agreement. "I'll have a word with anyone spreading malicious gossip." Mayor Wallace cleared his throat. "Silver Peak is growing into a proper town. We need good people like yourself, Miss Ainsworth, who bring skills and character to our community." Tears pricked at Cassidy's eyes at their acceptance. "Thank you, gentlemen. Your kindness means more than I can express." The dinner progressed pleasantly, with conversation turning to town matters and plans for the upcoming Christmas celebrations. By the time Isaac escorted Cassidy back to Mrs. Holloway's, she felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. At her door, Isaac took her hands in his. "I hope you're not angry with me for arranging that dinner." "How could I be?" she replied softly. "You've given me back my good name." "You never lost it, Cassidy." "Not in my eyes." His gaze was tender in the lantern light. "May I call on you tomorrow?" "Yes," she whispered, and before she could think better of it, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Isaac." The following day was Saturday, and Cassidy had the afternoon free from her bank duties. Isaac arrived at 1 o'clock, inviting her for a ride to a spot he wanted to show her. The November day was crisp but sunny, perfect for an outing. They rode for about an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills east of town. Finally, Isaac helped her down from the buggy at a clearing that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below, with Silver Peak nestled in its heart and the mountains rising majestically beyond. "It's magnificent," Cassidy said, turning slowly to take in the panorama. "I come here to think," Isaac told her, spreading a blanket on a flat rock. "To remember what matters." They sat side by side, sharing a simple picnic lunch Mrs. Gutierrez had packed. As they ate, Isaac spoke of his life before Silver Peak, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his brief marriage to Elizabeth, and the devastating fever that took both her and their infant son in a single terrible week. "I couldn't stay there afterward," he said, his voice rough with remembered grief. "Every street, every room held memories that were too painful. So I headed west, determined to start over." Cassidy understood completely. "And you found Silver Peak." "I found purpose here," he corrected. "A reason to build something lasting." His eyes held hers. "But I never expected to find someone who would make me want to share it." Her heart quickened at his words. "Isaac, I know it hasn't been long," he continued, taking her hand. "But I think perhaps we recognize something in each other from the beginning, two people who have loved and lost, who understand the value of second chances." Cassidy's throat tightened with emotion. "I came here thinking I would build a solitary life, that it would be easier than risking my heart again. And now—" She looked at him, this good, steady man who had defended her honor without hesitation, who had shared his own pain and understood hers. "Now I find myself wondering if there might be room in that life for someone else." Isaac's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I'd like to court you properly, Cassidy Ainsworth." "With your permission." "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." As winter descended on Silver Peak, Isaac's courtship of Cassidy became the talk of the town, but now the whispers held approval rather than suspicion. They were seen together at church, at the town's Christmas festival, and occasionally dining at the hotel. Isaac called at Mrs. Holloway's 3 evenings a week, sometimes just to sit by the fire and talk, other times to take Cassidy for sleigh rides through the snow-covered landscape. By Christmas Eve, Cassidy found herself falling deeply in love with Isaac Xavier. He was everything she had never dared hope to find again: kind, principled, and unwavering in his support. When he invited her to join him and Mrs. Gutierrez for Christmas dinner at the ranch, she accepted without hesitation. The day was perfect, the ranch house decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, a fire crackling in the massive stone hearth, and the delicious aromas of roast turkey and cinnamon filling the air. After dinner, Mrs. Gutierrez tactfully retired to her quarters, leaving Cassidy and Isaac alone by the fire. "I have something for you," Isaac said, reaching into his pocket. He handed her a small package wrapped in silver paper. Cassidy opened it carefully to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the intricate engraving. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny photograph not of Isaac or herself, but of a mountain view she recognized. It was the outlook he had shown her, where they had first spoken of courting. "So you'll always remember that moment," he explained. "The beginning of us." Tears welled in her eyes. "It's perfect. Thank you." She reached into her own bag and withdrew a package. "I have something for you as well." Isaac unwrapped it to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with his initials. "For your ranch plans and thoughts," she said. "You mentioned you like to write things down." He ran his hand over the supple leather. "This is wonderful, Cassidy. Truly thoughtful." He helped her fasten the locket around her neck, his fingers lingering at her nape. When she looked up, their faces were close, and she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes. "Cassidy," he murmured, "I'm falling in love with you." The words sent a thrill through her. "I'm falling in love with you too, Isaac." He kissed her, then gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. It was a kiss of promise, of healing, of hope reborn. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Cassidy." "Merry Christmas, Isaac," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. As winter gave way to spring, Cassidy and Isaac's courtship deepened. He spoke increasingly of their future together, of plans for the ranch, of children they might have. Cassidy found herself dreaming of such possibilities, though a part of her remained cautious, afraid to tempt fate by wanting too much. In late March, as the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow, Isaac invited Cassidy for a Sunday ride. They traveled to their special outlook, now becoming green with new growth. After helping her from the buggy, Isaac led her to the edge of the clearing. "I have something I want to ask you," he said, his expression serious yet tender. Cassidy's heart quickened. "Yes." To her surprise, Isaac knelt before her, taking her hand in his. "Cassidy Ainsworth, you came to Silver Peak seeking a new beginning. So did I years ago. I never expected to find love again after losing Elizabeth, but then you stepped off that stagecoach and into my life." His voice grew husky with emotion. "You've brought joy back into my world. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Cassidy's cheeks as happiness surged through her. "Yes, Isaac. Yes, I'll marry you." He rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with such tenderness that fresh tears welled in her eyes. When they parted, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring of sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in gold. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, slipping it onto her finger. "I had it sized for you in Denver." "It's beautiful," she whispered, admiring how it caught the spring sunlight. "Perfect." They rode back to town hand in hand, both glowing with happiness. At Mrs. Holloway's, Isaac formally asked for Cassidy's hand, though the older woman had clearly been expecting the request. "It's about time," she said with a smile. "I've never seen two people better suited." News of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Peak. Congratulations poured in from every quarter, and Cassidy was touched by the community's genuine happiness for them. Even Mr. Jenkins at the bank was enthusiastic, though he lamented losing his best clerk. "You'll still need to train your replacement before the wedding," he told her with mock sternness. They set the date for early June, giving them time to prepare while taking advantage of the beautiful summer weather. Cassidy found unexpected joy in the wedding preparations, selecting fabric for her dress, planning the ceremony with Reverend Porter, discussing with Isaac how they would combine their households. It was during these happy weeks that the incident occurred which would test their bond. Cassidy was working late at the bank one evening in early May, finalizing the monthly accounts before handing over her duties to her replacement. The bank was closed, but Mr. Jenkins had given her a key so she could complete her work without interruption. As she gathered her papers to leave, she heard the front door open. "Mr. Jenkins?" she called, assuming her employer had returned for something. Instead, a stranger entered, a tall man with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Recognition hit Cassidy like a physical blow. "Colonel Thornfield," she said, her voice barely audible. Robert's father looked older than when she'd last seen him, his face lined with grief and bitterness. Miss Ainsworth, it took some effort to find you. What do you want? She asked, forcing steadiness into her voice. Justice, he replied coldly. The man who murdered my son was acquitted last month. Insufficient evidence, they said. Cassidy's hand went to her throat. I'm sorry to hear that. Truly. But what has this to do with me? Everything. Colonel Thornfield's eyes burned with a frightening intensity. If you hadn't distracted Robert with your charms, he would never have let his guard down. He would still be alive. That's not fair, Cassidy protested, anger rising through her fear. I loved your son. His death devastated me as well. Yet here you are, preparing to marry another man. The colonel's lip curled in disgust. Your mourning was brief indeed. It's been nearly 2 years, she said, struggling to maintain her composure. Robert would not have wanted me to spend my life alone and grieving. You don't get to speak for my son, Thornfield shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. You're nothing but a fortune-hunting opportunist who, that's enough. The deep voice from the doorway made them both turn. Isaac stood there, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading daylight. His expression was calm, but Cassidy could see the tension in his posture. This is a private conversation, Colonel Thornfield said dismissively. It doesn't concern you. That's where you're wrong. Isaac stepped fully into the room, moving to Cassidy's side. Anything that concerns my fiancée concerns me. The colonel's eyes narrowed. So you're the rancher she's ensnared. Tell me, sir, has she informed you of her history? Of how her last fiancé met his end? I know everything about Cassidy's past, Isaac replied evenly, including the false accusations you made against her. Thornfield's face flushed with anger. False. My son is dead because of her. Your son was murdered by a thief and a coward, Isaac corrected, his voice hardening. Your grief is understandable, Colonel, but your blame is misplaced. How dare you? No, sir, how dare you? Isaac's eyes flashed. You've traveled across the country to harass an innocent woman who has already suffered enough. That stops now. Thornfield drew himself up. I don't take orders from a backwoods rancher. Perhaps not, came another voice. Sheriff Thompson stood in the doorway, hand resting on his sidearm. But you'll take them from me. I suggest you leave town, Colonel. First stage leaves at 9 tomorrow morning. The colonel looked from the sheriff to Isaac to Cassidy, his face a mask of thwarted rage. This isn't over, he spat. Yes, it is, Isaac said firmly. That's my wife you're threatening, Colonel. Or she will be, very soon. I protect what's mine. Something in Isaac's tone, the absolute certainty, the implied steel behind the words made Thornfield hesitate. He glared at Cassidy one final time before storming out, brushing past the sheriff without a word. As soon as he was gone, Cassidy's knees buckled. Isaac caught her, holding her close as she trembled. How did you know? She asked into his shoulder. Mrs. Holloway was worried when you didn't return on time. I came looking and saw a stranger entering the bank. He stroked her hair gently. I heard enough to understand who he was. Sheriff Thompson approached, concern etched on his weathered face. Miss Ainsworth, are you all right? She nodded, composing herself. Yes, thank you, Sheriff. I don't think the colonel will cause any more trouble. I'll make sure he's on that stage tomorrow, Thompson promised. And I'll keep an eye on the bank tonight, just in case. After the sheriff left, Isaac insisted on escorting Cassidy back to Mrs. Holloway's. As they walked through the quiet streets, arm in arm, he asked, Are you truly all right, Cassidy? She considered the question carefully. I am. Seeing Colonel Thornfield was a shock, but in a way, it was also freeing. How so? For so long, I've carried the weight of his accusations, the shadow of that terrible time. But tonight, when he made the same old claims. She looked up at Isaac, her eyes clear. I realize they no longer have power over me. My life is here now. With you. Isaac smiled, drawing her closer against the evening chill. You were remarkable. So strong. It helped knowing you were there. She squeezed his arm. When you said, That's my wife you're threatening. I meant every word, he said, his voice low and intense. I know we're not married yet, but in my heart, you're already my wife, Cassidy. I will always stand between you and harm. At Mrs. Holloway's doorstep, he kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. 2 more weeks, he murmured against her lips. 2 weeks until you're Mrs. Xavier. I can hardly wait, she replied, her heart full to bursting. True to Sheriff Thompson's word, Colonel Thornfield was on the morning stage, leaving Silver Peak and Cassidy's past behind for good. The incident, rather than casting a shadow over their wedding preparations, seemed to strengthen the bond between Cassidy and Isaac. They had faced an adversary together and emerged victorious. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. The ceremony was held in the town's small church, which overflowed with well-wishers. Cassidy wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Holloway and Clara Wilson had helped her make, with lace at the throat and wrists. Her hair was adorned with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of spring blooms from Mrs. Gutierrez's garden. Isaac waited at the altar, tall and handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed. The look of wonder and love in his eyes when he saw Cassidy walking toward him brought tears to many in the congregation. Reverend Porter's ceremony was simple but moving. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was held at the Circle X Ranch, with tables set up under the trees and lanterns strung from the branches. There was music and dancing, feasting and laughter. Cassidy found herself surrounded by friends, people who had once whispered about her past, but now embraced her as one of their own. As the evening drew to a close, Isaac led Cassidy to the porch of what was now their home. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "When I came to Silver Peak, I was just hoping for peace. I never dreamed I would find love again. We found each other," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Two broken hearts made whole again. The first weeks of marriage were a sweet discovery. Cassidy adjusted easily to life on the ranch, finding joy in creating a home with Isaac. Mrs. Gutierrez remained as their housekeeper, but gave the newlyweds plenty of space to establish their own rhythms and routines. Cassidy threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, learning about cattle breeding, helping with the accounts, and establishing a vegetable garden that soon became her pride and joy. Isaac delighted in teaching her to ride properly, and they often explored the ranch's far reaches together on horseback. At night, they discovered the profound intimacy of marriage, the tender passion, the whispered confidences, the comfort of falling asleep and waking in each other's arms. Cassidy had never known such complete happiness. By their first anniversary, Cassidy had news to share. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, she took Isaac's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly, watching his face for his reaction. Joy and wonder transformed his features. "A baby? You're sure?" She nodded, smiling through happy tears. "Dr. Morrison confirmed it yesterday. We're expecting a Christmas child." Isaac gathered her in his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Our family." The months of Cassidy's pregnancy passed in a haze of anticipation and preparation. Isaac was attentive to her every need, and the entire community seemed to share in their excitement. The nursery was prepared, tiny garments sewn, and many evenings were spent discussing names and dreams for their child's future. On December 18th, 1884, after a labor that tested Cassidy's strength but never her courage, their son was born, a healthy, robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's storm-gray eyes. "What shall we name him?" Isaac asked, cradling his son with careful hands that had never seemed so gentle. Cassidy smiled tiredly. "I was thinking of James. James Robert Xavier." Isaac's eyes met hers, understanding the significance of the middle name. "It's perfect," he said softly. "A tribute to the past that led us to this moment." Little James thrived, bringing new joy to the Circle X Ranch. Cassidy proved as natural a mother as she had a wife, caring for her son with a fierce devotion that made Isaac love her all the more. The whispers about her past were long forgotten, replaced by admiration for the capable, gracious woman who had captured Silver Peak's most eligible bachelor and given him the family he'd once lost. 5 years passed, bringing prosperity to the Circle X and 2 more children to the Xavier family, twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine, born in the spring of 1887. The ranch expanded, as did Silver Peak itself, growing from a mining town into a regional hub for commerce and agriculture. On a warm summer evening in 1889, Cassidy and Isaac sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. James, now 4.5, was showing his 2-year-old sisters how to roll a hoop, his patient instructions audible in the quiet evening air. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Cassidy said, leaning against Isaac's shoulder. "Sometimes I can hardly believe they're ours." Isaac's arm tightened around her. "Best things I ever helped create," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple, "though their mother deserves most of the credit." Cassidy laughed, the sound as carefree as it had been rare when they first met. "I think you had some part in it." Speaking of which, Isaac's voice took on a teasing note. "Mrs. Gutierrez has offered to watch the children overnight on Saturday. I thought perhaps we might ride up to our outlook, just the two of us. A night under the stars." Cassidy's eyes sparkled. "I'd love that." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun sink below the mountains. Finally, Cassidy spoke, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if we hadn't found each other?" Isaac considered the question. "Sometimes. I might have continued as I was building something to last, but with no one to share it. Existing rather than truly living." He turned to look at her, his gaze tender. "You brought me back to life, Cassidy. You and our children. And you gave me a new beginning when I thought my life was over," she replied softly. "A safe harbor when the storm seemed endless." From across the yard came the sound of childish laughter as James chased his sisters in an impromptu game of tag. The ranch buildings glowed golden in the evening light, solid and welcoming. "We've built something beautiful here," Isaac said, his voice rich with satisfaction. "Yes," Cassidy agreed, resting her head on his shoulder and feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Something that will last." The next day, Isaac rode into Silver Peak for supplies. As he loaded his wagon outside the mercantile, he overheard a conversation between two men new to town. "Who's that?" one asked, nodding toward Isaac. "Xavier. Owns the big ranch east of town," his companion replied. "Heard something about his wife having some scandalous past back east." Before the other man could respond, Isaac straightened to his full height and turned to face them. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet street, "that's my wife you're talking about." The men had the grace to look embarrassed. "No offense meant, Mr. Xavier," the first one stammered. Isaac's expression remained stern. "My wife is the most honorable woman I've ever known. She's the mother of my children, the heart of my home, and respected by everyone in this community." His eyes held a warning. "I won't hear a word against her. Is that understood?" The men nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Sorry, sir." With a curt nod, Isaac returned to loading his supplies. As he climbed onto the wagon seat, he caught sight of Sheriff Thompson watching from across the street, an approving smile on his weathered face. Isaac tipped his hat to the lawman before flicking the reins, eager to return to the ranch, to home, to Cassidy, to the life they had built together from the ashes of their separate sorrows. As he drove, he thought about how far they had come. Cassidy had arrived in Silver Peak seeking only peace, a quiet place to rebuild her shattered life. He had been existing rather than living, pouring himself into his ranch to avoid confronting his loneliness. They had found in each other not just love, but redemption, a chance to believe in happiness again, to trust, to hope. Together, they had created something neither could have imagined alone: a family, a legacy, a love that had transformed whispers of scandal into a story of triumph. The road stretched before him, leading home to Cassidy. Isaac smiled, urging the horses to a quicker pace. The past had its place, but their future, bright with promise and possibility, was what called to him now. And it was a future they would face as they had faced everything else since finding each other. Together, hand in hand, hearts beating as one.